Hi, my name is Shannon Biggs, and I'm the Community Rights Program Director at Global Exchange, where much of my work is as a community organizer, where along with my partners at the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, also known as CELDEF, we assist communities confronted by corporate harms to pass really revolutionary laws that do three things. The first thing is they assert the rights of the communities to make governing decisions about their local health and well-being, their local quality of life. They strip corporations of the so-called rights, which I think are better called privileges and protections, that corporations use to turn our communities into sacrifice zones for corporate profit. And the third thing these laws do is to recognize legal rights for ecosystems, which provides legal standing to ecosystems and empowers communities to act as stewards of their local environment. There are about 140 communities that have passed these cutting-edge rights-based laws, and about 3 dozen or more of those, including Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, who passed an ordinance to ban hydrofracking, otherwise known as fracking, hydrofracturing, that includes the rights of nature. So of those 140 communities, about 30 or more of the sort of newer ordinances include rights of nature. And it's on this rights of nature piece of this work that I'm going to spend a little time talking about the rights of nature and talk about the national and international work I do at Global Exchange to help build a movement to change not only laws, but the culture around the idea that nature has intrinsic rights. The ideas of living in harmony with all other species, it's not a new idea. Ancient indigenous wisdom, values, and traditions are really at the core of what is perhaps they better understand as rights of Mother Earth. The idea that we are all of this earth, earth is our mother, that we are connected to our four-legged cousins, the winged ones, the water, the source of all life, and everything really is as part of the circle of life. In Western culture, we're not quite there yet, semantically speaking, and rights of nature is a more popular language. So whether we're talking about rights of Mother Earth or rights of nature, what we're talking about is a very different approach to law and governance that takes the natural order of the cosmos into account and focuses on ensuring the health and integrity of the whole system, rather than being exclusively focused on just our own human interests. Currently, in the eyes of the law, we don't understand nature as a system governing our well-being, something that we're a part of, this bigger picture. Our human laws see nature as property, not just apart from us, outside of ourselves, but a thing and a possession, property, like a slave. And as property, we can pretty much do with our property whatever we want, according to our own human interests and our benefit. But when we take a step back and we say, well, what is climate change but a warning that we're in violation of nature's laws? Climate change isn't the real problem as I see it, but rather a symptom of how we treat the earth in violation of these natural laws. And when I'm talking about natural laws, I mean gravity. Now that is a law. I mean, it's not just a good idea. But the word rights, as we use them, represent that intangible something that we're all born with, that sense of equality and things that we're entitled to just by virtue of being born. These rights are what we're talking about. Is really, it's higher law than human law. It's the essence of the light. So these rights are inalienable. And as we see it, they belong, of course, not just to humans, but to the process of creation itself. So the system of life that governs our well-being, the system of rights needs to be protected for not just humans, but all things, because we are, in fact, part of that system. So protecting just ourselves and our own interests is kind of how we got into the mess that we're in. The other thing we say about rights is that rights as higher law, they don't come from government. It's not like a hall pass at school. But really the purpose of rights or the purpose of law and just law is to uphold and protect rights. That's what laws are supposed to be for. And this idea that we can't flourish by breaking the laws of nature, in fact, we can't even protect ourselves from self-destruction as long as we think of ourselves as separate and superior. So rights of Mother Earth is really this human recognition that we're part of this larger community, and if we want to flourish and evolve as a species and as part of this Earth community, we have to recognize that we have to recognize the laws of this Earth community and align our government systems with natural systems. To do things like ensure that our human activities don't impair the ability of natural systems to absorb and neutralize our activities. So moving on to environmental regulatory laws and rights of nature laws, this is really just what is the difference between what we call rights of nature laws and the current environmental protections that we have. And it's interesting, in 1973, Professor Christopher Stone wrote the famous article, law review article called "Should Trees Have Standing?" And one of the things that he wrote that really strikes a chord with me is the fact is, and that's the quote, the fact is that each time there is a movement to confer rights onto some new entity, the proposal is bound to sound odd or frightening or laughable. And this is partly because until the right-less thing receives its rights, we cannot see it as anything but a thing for the use of us being, of course, those who hold rights. And when we think about law, that's really how we use power, not only to codify, but to enforce the values of a society. It allows those values to become real, in a real place, in a real time. And despite these notions of law and government existing to protect and uphold our rights, from time to time we get it wrong. And the law actually works to deny rights. I mean, neither slaves nor women were born as property. It was unjust laws that made real the values of a minority elite to deny those populations their rights and treating them as property in the law. And even more to the point is when we think about, so how do we shift something as big as what we're talking about here? And eventually culture shifted enough to give rise to movements for abolitionists, for women's suffrage movements, to drive those rights into the law. And then the law then provides this mechanism to force the greater cultural shift toward these new values. And this is where we're headed with the ideas of codifying the rights of nature in law. And so just briefly looking at environmental law as it exists, under the current system of law, activities destructive to nature are absolutely legal. Mountaintop removal is legal. Hydrofracking is legal. Despite the destruction to the communities and their local ecosystems, current U.S. state and federal law, and law nearly everywhere, not just in the U.S., says that corporations don't need community permission to drop pesticides overhead or to extract massive amounts of water from a local aquifer or to site a toxic dump in town. We're told, the law tells us, that we can't say no to the unwanted project because that would be a violation of corporate constitutional rights. And this goes far beyond corporate personhood. The protections and privileges for the corporate minority are deeply embedded in things like the Commerce Clause and the Contracts Clause of the Constitution and a whole slew of other laws that really protect this and enable this system. And so these tools allow corporations to come in and ride roughshod over our communities and the ecosystems upon which we depend. So one of the things that we're talking about is, through the regulatory system, is that environmental protection is left to the regulatory system, which first legalizes the harms, the unwanted activity, and then attempts to limit the damage. In this sense, the regulatory system itself, so things like the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, which actually govern how much pollution of our air and water will occur. So it allows the damage to come in the first place and then limits what we can do as activists to stop it. So although it's, and then of course, although it's really seldom said out loud, it's often the industry to be regulated that creates the laws, these regulatory laws, that we ask our legislators to enforce. And when it becomes too expensive to comply with the regulations, corporations are often exempted from them or the regulations are rewritten. So by design, our environmental laws place commerce above nature, and in so doing, they legalize certain amounts of harm to ecosystems. And so by design, regulatory agencies administering these laws are in place to operationalize that exploitation. And this isn't to say that we haven't protected anything while toiling within the system of law, not at all. Whatever limits to damage have been achieved have come from the dedicated vigilance of the hands of millions of caring people. But if we take a step back to look at the big picture, we have to also recognize what's been lost. And by almost every measure, the environment today is in worse shape than when the major U.S. environmental laws were adopted nearly 40 years ago. The next thing I want to just touch on briefly is this idea of legal standing and what that means. And in the United States, title to property carries with it the legal authority to destroy natural communities, which include human communities and ecosystems that depend on that property for survival. So as I was saying earlier, that the Commerce Clause is not just a source of power for corporate decision making, but the fact is that our environmental laws are passed under the authority of the Commerce Clause, so which grants exclusive authority over interstate commerce to Congress. And everything, and I mean everything, the migration of birds, rivers flowing to the sea, is covered, is considered commerce. So under the existing environmental laws, a person needs to prove standing in order to go to court to protect nature. And this means demonstrating some kind of personal harm from an activity, whether it's logging, the pollution of a river, whether it's a BP oil spill. Damages are then awarded to that person, not the ecosystem that's been destroyed. So in the wake of the BP oil spill, the only damage deemed compensable is the financial damage caused to those people who can't use the Gulf ecosystem anymore, could show personal injury or property damage, so to their businesses. And it's really this system of law that the communities that we work with across the United States are turning their backs on the system because it can't provide the environmental protection that they need, not for themselves and for their communities. And so they're really beginning to craft and adopt these new laws that recognize that natural communities and ecosystems possess an inalienable and fundamental right to exist, to flourish, to regenerate their natural cycles, and to evolve. And residents of those communities, as stewards of the place where they live, possess the legal authority to enforce those rights on behalf of those ecosystems. In addition, these laws require local governments to remedy violation of those ecosystem rights. So if we imagine that the Gulf Coast ecosystem had a right to be unaltered by human activities, such as deep sea drilling, first of all, it would put in place protections that would govern the kinds of activities that could take place in the Gulf Coast ecosystem. And so I think it would, when we take a look at exactly what deep sea drilling looks like and the effects that it's had on the Gulf Coast community, wouldn't be legal as currently practiced. And in the case of a violation, such as the BP oil spill, imagine if the Gulf Coast could actually sue BP for violating the rights of that ecosystem, for full restoration of that ecosystem, as if you could fully restore the Gulf Coast to the way it was before. But how would that change the way that we do drilling? What would be the impact on our energy systems, on our whole way of thinking? What we're talking about is a fundamental shift in property law. It doesn't end property law. It doesn't end development. Rather, it stops the kind of development that interferes with the existence and vitality of ecosystems. So just a quick look at the history, the timeline of the movement for rights of nature. A lot of people, I think, think these are some sort of an isolated case. And in fact, the first U.S. community, and maybe the first anywhere that I know of, to pass a law recognizing rights for nature was in 2006. With my colleagues at the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, helped the Sumak borough in Pennsylvania to recognize legally enforceable rights of nature. And it's interesting because dozens of communities have passed them in the United States. And that language from that first community was actually taken to Ecuador as an example while they were going through their constitutional convention and their process. And they actually wanted to see the language in the law of these first U.S. communities to pass this, to pass these ideas into law. And in fact, the language was broadened and expanded and is included in their 2008 Ecuador included Rights of Mother Earth in its natural constitution. And the constitution reads, nature, or Pachamama, where life is reproduced and where it exists, has the right to exist, persist, maintain itself, and regenerate its own vital cycles, structure, functions, and its evolutionary processes. And that really provided this sort of international recognition for rights of Mother Earth. It wasn't just something that was happening in this small dot in the U.S. Following that, in 2009 was the abysmal failure of the United Nations Conference of Parties 15, the climate change negotiations, was such an utter failure and such an overt victory for this market-based system that treats nature as property. That from the ashes of that, you see that Bolivia stood up as a country. Evo Morales, the president, to put together another conference, the Bolivia World Summit on Rights of Mother Earth and Climate Change. And a few important things. I mean, 36,000 people came to participate. It wasn't a conference of environmental ministers. It was a conference of indigenous people, activists from around the world. And from that came the Universal Declaration on the Rights of Mother Earth, which was penned by thousands of people in an open process there as something to be brought to the United Nations as a companion for the Universal Declaration on the Rights of Human Rights. And it was also an important link between climate change and the rights of nature, that we can't separate these two things, and that climate change is in fact connected to the way that we treat nature. So it also gave rise to this idea that it's not just something happening in Ecuador or in some random community in the United States, but something that belongs to everybody, that the rights of Mother Earth are something that we all participate in. It's a new framework for activism everywhere. And we start to see this really beginning to gain momentum. In 2010, the UN General Assembly had the first event, Harmony with Nature, in which the Universal Declaration and the Rights of Mother Earth were discussed for the first time at the General Assembly. A book on rights of nature from all around the world was collected and put together at that time to sort of explore what these ideas look like from all points on the planet. And in 2011, we see Bolivia passes some laws around rights of Mother Earth. We see that also the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature as a coalition was born during this time to assist countries and communities all around the world to help recognize and put these laws in place and these ideas. And in 2012, in the U.S., there was an indigenous summit on the rights of Mother Earth to again reaffirm what those ideas and how they are rooted in indigenous wisdom. And so we really see this movement growing and growing and growing with these ideas of buen vivir, or Sumak Kawsay, which is Quechua in Ecuador, for the ideas of living well, not living more. This isn't about giving rights to nature. We're going to, live some, some lifestyle that's so vastly. We're not going to be living in huts or anything necessarily. This is about living well, not living more. And so for next steps, we're really looking at what are the new economic models based on this sense of balance, and there are groups who are working on that. And how is it that we can support existing new laws that are popping up? How do we actually make this paradigm shift between this market-based system and this economic framework that we have that treats nature like it's going out of business? And how do we embed these ideas within existing movements? And that's something that is also already happening. So we have to believe that we can shift the paradigm. I think that's one of the most important points. And as many of us activists are headed to the next Earth Summit, Rio+20, a new report is being produced on rights of Mother Earth. It's an important moment because it's this idea that the Earth Summit was really imagined to put together an international vision for sustainable development, and really what has come out of this UN process is something very different. And so this is yet another opportunity for the international community to gather